Hello everyone, my name is Adam. Today I'll be sharing a tutorial on how to convert a 2-rail DC model locomotive to 3-rail AC, aka the Marklin system. So the Marklin system has a 3rd rail in the middle, which actually carries the power, with the 2 tracks being ground. As my example here, I have a Piko 96342 locomotive. This is a DC digital model in HO scale. As you can see here, there's no pickup shoe underneath, so we need to mount one, but it actually has a little socket for it already. The idea here is that we could take any non-Marklin model and convert it to the Marklin system. Unfortunately, Marklin themselves hasn't made that big of a variety of models, so it's really nice that we can just take models from other brands and convert them over to the AC system. There are only 2 real steps to complete the conversion. The first one is to connect all the ground wires, and the second is to install the pickup shoe. Before we get started, it's really important to do some planning. And to help with that, I'm going to show you 2 other models that I've already converted. So here's another Piko model that's really similar to this one. It's got the 3-axle trucks, and it also had the cutout for the pickup shoe. So a couple things that we need to pay attention to is that the pickup shoe needs to be mounted straight, right? So it can't be pointing to the left or the right. And it also needs to be able to collapse below the wheels like this. Not all models will be designed to be able to do this, and so sometimes you might need to start cutting into the trucks with a cutting tool. Here's a second example. This one actually was never designed to run on AC, so this is basically a homemade conversion, if you will. This one actually uses a different pickup shoe, but as with the first one, the pickup shoe can collapse below the wheels, and there's also plenty of clearance around it. Looking at this locomotive, I'm just going to install the pickup shoe here and route the wire to the inside of the locomotive, and then I'll do some soldering in there to connect all the ground wires, and that should do it. Here's a quick overview of some of the tools you might want to have handy. So some basic screwdrivers, wire cutter, wire stripper, wire that's as thin as you can possibly get it, basically, solder, and some tweezers usually come in handy. Looking at the pickup shoes themselves, today I'll be using this Piko 56110. For some of the other models, this Roco one is really good. You may also have to use one from Marklin or different brands depending on the exact nature of the locomotive you're doing. So this part requires some trial and error. I'm lucky in this case that this pickup shoe basically corresponds to this locomotive, but I've had pretty good success with the Roco one as well on other models. The other thing that really comes in handy is a foam service tray. I have one from ESU, and you'll see me using this throughout the video. First step is to open up the locomotive. This one doesn't have any screws, so you just pry it apart basically. After a bit of off-camera wrangling, finally got it open. Piko actually makes life easy, but these steps will basically apply to any locomotive. So let's take a look at what wiring we have. We have the left wheel on both sides, and then we have the right wheel on both sides. So right now the left wheel has the black wire and the right wheel has the red wire. On this circuit board, Piko actually already labeled a AC terminal here. So if you move this wire to the spot labeled AC, it'll basically connect the ground on both sides. And then all we need to do after that is to add the pickup shoe on one of the 2 sides and solder that wire. So to recap, I'm unsoldering this red one and connecting it here. Same thing on the other side. These ones stay the same. And then we'll add the pickup shoe wire to either of these sides depending on where the socket is. One thing to keep in mind is if you're doing an analog to digital conversion, you can always just install the decoder first, test the locomotive as DC digital, and then proceed with essentially the steps in this tutorial. One other thing to note with Piko specifically is they have this AC DC screw. So you're going to want to move the DC screw over to the AC position, and then that should do it. If you need to mount a speaker, you can solder that on as well, but this model already has it. So that's nice and easy. All right, now it's time to mess with the pickup shoe. Just gonna open this bag. It comes with a bunch of different screws. The one that we're gonna need to use today is this one, but again, it'll depend on the locomotive. So you gotta look at the size of the existing hole, or if you're gonna be drilling one yourself, then make sure you match your drill bit to the screws that you have available. It can be hard to come by small enough screws sometimes. All right, so looking at this pickup shoe here, you can see that it has this cardboard base to which the metal bit is attached. And if we compare that to the cutout on the truck, you'll notice that the cardboard actually gets in the way of this little hump here. So what does that mean? That means that we need to trim the little red cardboard piece here to make it fit properly. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to trim basically to the edge, to the right of these two metal clips and then to the left of the other ones, leaving just the little middle piece intact. And you do want to be very careful here because the mount is pretty close to the metal and it is easy to accidentally cut it. So you do want to proceed with caution. The other thing to note is that you want to make your cut really precise because this needs to fit perfectly in the socket that the locomotive has, or the socket that you've created. You can always adjust the corners later if needed. And again, this will depend from, this will vary depending on the locomotive that you have. Hopefully the cutting I just did was good enough and this will fit perfectly where it needs to be, and it does. So you can see now that when I push down, this pickup shoe essentially disappears into the truck. It's not going to bother anybody. It's not going to cause any short circuits while running. And then we can go ahead and proceed with the installation. We do need to remove the trucks on this particular model. So I'm going to start by doing that. This magnetic strip is actually really handy for not losing things. And now that I've removed the screws, this should just come right off. You do want to be careful. It can be annoying if the wheels come off. So ideally just leave them where they are. And now looking at this truck here, you can see that there's a little hole that they cut out for us to be able to install the pickup shoe. And what that basically means is that when I attach the wire to this, it needs to be perfectly flush with that hole. So there's a couple strategies you can do. You can either try soldering while the pickup shoe is mounted. I wouldn't recommend this because you risk damaging the truck itself. Or you could just install the wire, as vertically as you can to essentially center it on this little piece of metal. And that's what I'm going to try doing today. Unfortunately, I don't have the world's best solder, but we're going to try to be careful. Just put on a very small amount. And then I already pre-stripped this wire with the wire stripper. Definitely a good idea to do here. And we'll try to attach it as vertically as we can. So it looks like I got lucky. It's centered pretty well in there. It's attached nicely. And the next step will be to feed it through the holes on the truck and get the wire inside the locomotive. Started feeding the wire through here, so just pull it all the way up, and you can see here that this is actually looking pretty good. So the next step is going to be to just go ahead and mount this with the screw, and then once the screw is mounted, we'll deal with routing the wire into the locomotive. Regardless of what type of pickup shoe you're using, you do want to make sure that you're careful during this process. I mean, precision's the name of the game with these things. Just make sure that you're holding it down so that it remains straight, and be very careful not to bend any of the metal, because if it pivots in one direction or the other, or if it's crooked, you might have issues running the locomotive. So I'm going to try to go ahead and tighten this now, while keeping the pickup shoe as straight as I can get it. Just being really slow about tightening it. All right, that looks pretty good. You can see it's centered pretty nicely. And again, this is one of the most important parts of the installation, making sure this thing is not bent and straight. So once you finish that, it's pretty much mission accomplished. And you just have to attach the wire. On this particular model, they actually pre-cut a little hole through which you can feed the wire. If your model isn't designed for this, then you may have to drill a small hole, either like this or underneath sort of where this one is, to be able to feed the wire through. Otherwise it might get caught up in the wheels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just align this wire roughly in between the wheels. I'll push it into position later. And then we're just going to feed this through between the truck and the locomotive body, and pull it through on the other side. You can see it's already appearing. So I'm just going to pull it all the way through here. And then I'm going to reattach. I'm going to align that wire inside there and then reattach the truck. So if you look closely here, you can actually see that I got really lucky with this wire, and it's already sitting inside that hole. But sometimes a little flathead, like really small flathead screwdriver, can help you adjust that if you need to. So now let's put this thing back together. Again, we need to be careful with this particular truck because the screw sits right below, almost directly below the pickup shoe. So I'm going to use the tweezers to gently set it down, and then I'm going to try to tighten it with the smallest screwdriver that I have. Again, trying to avoid to deflect the pickup shoe if at all possible. And as you can see, if you're careful, It does get pretty close, but barely pushing it there. So now we're just going to inspect that it's still straight. You can always adjust it a little bit later by loosening the screw. I think we are mostly okay, but I'll test it on the tracks later to make sure. Now that we're back on the other side of the locomotive, you can see here's the wire to the pickup shoe, and it's a little bit long, right? So we're going to need to trim it. So I'll be a little bit generous here. I'll leave some extra in case the wire stripper messes it up. We don't want to have to repeat this if we can at all avoid it. So now, as I mentioned earlier, all you really need to do is solder this to where the DC wire was originally, right? And now we'll be in a situation where it's getting the ground from the wheels and then the center rail up through this wire here. And that'll do it. Before you test the locomotive on the tracks, we want to use a multimeter to actually make sure that we're not screwing anything up here. If there is a short circuit inside the locomotive, that might not end well for your electronics. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make sure that the positive and the negative aren't connected. Right, so you should get nothing here, and you should get nothing on this side. So that's fine. And then you should see a connection between the two sides of the wheels. Right. So we're good there. And just as a sanity check, I'll do this one. All right, so now we are reasonably confident that we did a good job. It's time to put this thing on the tracks, make sure it works. Side note, with Piko decoders, they can run in either DCC or Marklin's MFX format. The same goes for ESU, but most locomotives that are two-rail DC use some form of DCC. And if that's the case, then you can just use that with your Marklin system. You won't need to get a Marklin decoder or anything like that, assuming, of course, that you have the central station or the central station 2. All right, I've set the newly converted locomotive on the programming track. And pro tip, you want to do this immediately after booting your central station, because that way it will use MFX mode instead of DCC if you want to use MFX. So now we're just going to turn the power on, and then the locomotive should start talking to the central station really soon. All right, so it successfully registered itself. So if we turn the lights on here, we can start to test the model. You can see that the lights work and it runs. What you want to do now is you want to run it through a bunch of switches around your layout to make sure that pickup shoe is aligned properly. I'm not going to show all the footage of that, but if it were to short circuit here, for example, that would be a good indication that it's time to readjust the pickup shoe. But since everything works, I'm just going to go ahead and put the canopy back on, and that should do the trick. And there we have one newly converted 3-rail digital, aka AC, locomotive here in HO scale. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this helpful, and feel free to post in the comments if you have any questions on how you can do this with other models. Thank you.